I was born in Guyana, South America, and I left there and came to the UK in 1980. I was about 10. I came as other people who had been separated from their parents, then came over to, the way they put it is to join your parents. Mm-hmm. So I come from. That's my cultural background. My the base, but then the name Yaa Asantewa, that's a one that I've taken on, just so that people aren't, because I know Guyanese are listening, they're like, that doesn't sound like a Guyanese.
Yeah. No worries. And if you could just elaborate more on your journey and how you developed along your spiritual path. I mean, were you raised in a traditional environment back in Guyana?
That's an interesting question, because, yeah, bearing in mind that I'm coming at the age of 10, so I wouldn't have had any idea about what traditional really meant. What we were raised in, you know, at that point was Christianity, as most of us can attest to. Particularly Seventh-day Adventist was our version. That's the tradition I was coming out. The tradition I was coming out of. Nothing to do with any version whatsoever of African anything. There were vague inferences to some things, but I wasn't really privy to that, unconscious of that. That would take a long time.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the actual point for you where you did start to connect with this ancient spiritual teachings?
Okay, so I would say it was first of all, before you connected, there's a disconnection that took place. So the disconnect was taking place from the beginning, I would say, because in Guyana, I rejected I call it intuitively or naturally or whatever the term we want to use. I rejected the church, really. I used to hide from my auntie, hide away when it was time on that Friday evening when you would have to go to prepare for the Sabbath. But I found a way to escape, and I'd go to an auntie who I knew wasn't Seventh-day Adventist. It would later turn out that actually she was a spiritualist, but I didn't know that at the time.
Okay.
And, you know, and so I would go to hers, and then that was how I'd escape. But once I came here and joined my mother, she was now trying to continue to send us to the Seventh-day Adventist thing. But I was like, you know, like, it's almost like I'm shaking my head, but yeah. I was young. I still had to do what I was told. My mum is also Unity, you know, so she had it was Christian, but it was slightly different. But she still was trying to raise us in the way of a relatively ordinary Christian. And so I tried that for a little while. And then one day, I was in my teens. I think I was about 15. I had a big argument with a member of my family. And I don't know how I equated that argument with, I'm no longer going to church. It's almost like I used the moment to just say to my mom, I'm not going to the church ever again.
Yeah.
And so now I'm kind of, because I had all these questions, you know, like that was just bugging me. You know, I had a kind of an irritation about this white God. I wasn't even conscious about the white. It was like a man in the sky that, you know, I just didn't believe this whole thing. And also there's some kind of cruelty that I felt about this person, like in the sky. How can you, for example, tempt your son, was it Isaac or one of them, that he tried to get to kill his son? There's all these bits that are just contradictory, yeah. So I rejected a lot of this. I fast forward, ended up to university, you know, relatively, I was about, what, 20, 24 or something. I'm going to university, and during the break in the summer holidays, there was this brother that I met who was, he was Christian, but he had gone through his own certain kinds of journey, and was he was kind of like given a Muslim name because he was just making his journey, but he kind of remained Christian. But he was talking about seeing me, or seeing all of us, as incarnations of, mostly he was talking about biblical characters like Sheba, you know, Queen Sheba, or, you know, so he was giving me this alternative way of seeing things and stuff like that. So when I kind of returned to university, I made a decision that I was going to basically bun Jesus. that's the only way I could put it. I was going to bun Jesus, yeah, because it frustrated me that you know, like if you're in a dream, if you're like in a kind of a nightmare, you go, plead the name of Jesus or whatever the thing is, and I don't even know where that came from. So you would call on Jesus to save you from whatever the nightmare was. So I taught myself to not do this.
Okay.
And when I'm dreaming, I'm not doing that. You know, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to call on my at that time I wasn't even really thinking about ancestors so much, but I can't remember what I thought, but I knew that I was no longer going to call on this Jesus name. And but I would still do things, because the only book and the only tool I had was the Bible still. So I would use the Bible and refer to it, because I really like the aspect of clapping and singing and all that sort of aspect of the church. I did like all of that, and I still do. And even today or yesterday, my mum and I were doing some revival type singing. So those bits I didn't have a problem with. It's just these other bits. And so what happened, to cut the long story, is that I would say, like in about the penultimate semester of my university, or there was a certain period where I had what I would say I was going through a kind of like a depression. Yeah. And I had this dream of my grandfather, and my grandfather took me on a plane, and he took me to Guyana. And when I woke up, I just made a decision that what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a year out of this university business. I'm going to go back to Guyana. So it had been 15 years since I'd been back. By now, I am made aware of some aspects of the traditional. You know, I'm aware of catching Comfa, or people going into trance states. I'm aware of obia, which we can talk about in a bit. So I'm aware of some things, and I'm aware of a spiritual world in Guyana, which for the most part, the way it's being described and talked about by the family is kind of scary. So they kept saying, why don't you go back home, go back to Guyana? First of all, I'm thinking, one, I don't have any money to do that. I am young. And two, why aren't you taking me? You know, they were concerned, my family, that I was whiteified. And I'd lost the plot of myself. And so my grandfather, I dreamt my grandfather, he took me home. I took the year out. I worked, saved, and then I said, I'm going to spend 6 months in Guyana. Went back to Guyana, stayed there for 6 months. I was it was 15 years later. I was 25 or 20 something anyway. And doing that was phenomenal, because it reconnected me to a sense of a foundation that was Guyanese. There were lots of spiritual things that were taking place that had nothing to do with an understanding of spirituality in any form. It was just phenomenal. It was just things that were happening that I was observing, like the moon, like the stars, just the richness, the waters. Everything was cosmically and naturally attuning me to it, if you like. And so when I came back to the UK, I was a totally different person. I was no longer afraid and nervous about who I am and all this kind of, you know. So something just clicked into gear. By the way, I didn't say that my grandfather's energy,
Yeah.
I felt it everywhere I went in Guyana. You know, I would go places, like I went into the interior on a truck. My family were like, that's scary. Why are you doing this? And so on. And I just did not feel afraid because I just felt like my grandfather was there with me. So to the conscious decision then to take on this thing happened when I came back to the UK, and I was doing very well. And it got to like about the last but one semester of my university. And I had this shifting thing started to happen, and I didn't understand it. I had to do a big project. You've done all the little projects and you've got your grades for those little projects, but there's a big project that would determine the outcome of your degree. Okay. And it was at that time that I had, well, now I can claim it as an altered state of consciousness took over. Mm-hmm. And so I went into a space and into a state that if I didn't, there was an intuitive something that took place whereby I called on my ancestors. I created a circle and I put my name in the middle of the circle. And I just put the names of my father, who'd been passed since I was like 8 or so. I put my grandfather, the same grandfather, and all of the ones that I knew by name, I put them in that circle. And I said, I don't know what's happening because I'm being compelled to commit suicide, for one. I'm doing all these random things like that, like, you know, I'm banging my head against the wall. I'm just trying to commit suicide. I'm just completely under, and I just didn't have control. So I just encircled myself in there, and I said, okay, let it be. So that would be the beginning of the beginning of where I am now.
So let me just get in there then. So you said you went through an altered state of consciousness, and I guess in Western terms, we would refer to that as what, a sort of mental breakdown. How would you describe what was actually happening, or how it would be perceived from those around you?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the Western understanding of things, it would, and I didn't know what it was. I wouldn't have known that it was an altered state of consciousness. It would take me some time before I realized that, and some time before I could even label it for what it really was. But yeah, they would call it a mental breakdown. She tripped out on too much studying. She schizophrenia, because I was showing all those behaviors, to be honest, for it lasted like nearly about a year of these behaviors. And so so they really would have been, that's what they would have called me. And my family, because I didn't complete my study, which was only a semester in the doing, I left the university. I mean, they tried their best, I must say, to understand what was happening, to send me to counselors and, you know, what have you, because my grades were all right. It was just this major one. They're like, forget everything else. We can aggregate it. You got to do this one. But what we'll do is we'll send you to the university counselor. I'd already seen a counselor some years before, so this would have been another time that I'm going to see a counselor. And I was like, so I went in to see the counselor in that state that I was in, you know. And I asked it was a young lady, and a young white lady, and I asked her, I don't know why, but I asked her, do you believe in God? And she said, no. And I said, well, you cannot help me. And I turned around and I walked out of that room, because I knew that it's very difficult to say but I did. It was like, because I was having all these dreams, these intense dreams. I felt that the university was a very dark place. I was seeing spiritually the underbelly of it. And so yeah, there were some things that I was just processing, and so I just didn't think that she could help me, so I left. And I came back to London. Sorry, I didn't say that I was studying in Scotland. I came back to London. Prior to that, I left the university building itself and went to a sister who was Christian off-campus lodgings, and there she looked after me, and it was a blessing that she was there to look after me. She was from Trinidad or somewhere, lovely sister. She looked after me whilst I was in this state of having these nightmarish type dreams, trying to still do the self-harming business. And I was trying to do the self-harm, but at the same time, there was a part in me where I said I would prepare to go to sleep and I was saying to whatever the thing was that I thought was getting to me, let's say if it was a schizophrenic head, okay, I'm going to deal with you. And tonight it's me and you. I had this attitude where I was going to fight the beast,
Wow.
But anyway, eventually I did come